We are diving deep into the history of classical Athens today. It's this place we all celebrate as the foundational model of democracy, a system really built on empowering every free citizen.
Absolutely. It's the birthplace of that powerful ideal
Yeah.
that ordinary people should have access to justice, to governing
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
But, and this is the core of our deep dive, if you look really closely at the sources, the speeches, the legal texts, what philosophers were saying back then, you find this really pervasive, corrosive shadow lurking beneath that shining democratic surface.
A shadow. And that shadow is essentially the constant threat of being attacked in public legally. Not for justice, not really for finding truth, but used as a weapon.
Right.
For personal grudges, political takedowns, and maybe most often just for money.
Exactly. We're talking about these figures often called sycophants.
Yeah.
Legal predators, really.
Defense, yeah, I've heard that term. So these weren't lawyers in our sense.
Not at all. More like freelance opportunists who knew how to work the system. They'd spot someone wealthy, maybe someone with a slightly questionable business deal or a complicated family history, and threaten them. Threaten them with a lawsuit, a public, messy, reputation-ruining trial.
And the victim would often just pay them off.
More often than not, yes. Pay a hefty sum to make the problem disappear. It was basically a form of legal blackmail, thriving right in the heart of the democracy.
Wow. Okay, so our mission today is to really get under the skin of this hyper-litigious reality.
Yeah, we want to examine how these open, accessible Athenian courts actually became an arena for, well, just ongoing conflict. How the legal rules themselves could be twisted and weaponized for blackmail and harassment.
And what this kind of inherent instability tells us about the limits of that kind of radical popular justice system.
Right.
Where does it break down?
Exactly. We're drawing on the primary texts,
Yeah.
the actual speeches given in court, the legal records we have, philosophical critiques. They reveal this fiercely adversarial, high-stakes world.
A world where the law's accessibility, the very thing we admire, was maybe also its biggest weakness, its most dangerous vulnerability.
That's the paradox we're exploring. So let's unpack the anatomy of conflict and the rise of the sycophant in the world's first democracy. #NAN-IEI, the hyper-litigious society of democratic Athens.
So when we think about the Athenian legal system, the first thing we need to do is probably ditch our modern image, right? No stern judges in robes, no professional lawyers arguing precedent.
Right. Forget that entirely.
Yeah.
The sources paint a completely different scene. Much more chaotic, much more personal.
Okay, so if it wasn't about finding neutral, objective justice as we'd think of it, what was the court's function in Athenian society? What was it actually doing?
Well, fundamentally, Athenian litigation, the actual lawsuits, they were often less about getting a final, definitive legal answer and more about providing an agonistic arena for the ongoing pursuit of conflict.
Agonistic arena. Agon, meaning contest, struggle.
Exactly. It was a sanctioned public space, a stage almost, where citizens could carry on their personal feuds, their political battles, their money disputes, all under the umbrella of a legal process.
So it's like a public ring for score settling, but with legal procedures. It suggests competition, fighting to win, maybe not so much a deep search for objective truth.
That's a very good way to put it.
But wait, wasn't the jury massive? Like hundreds, sometimes thousands of citizens? Wasn't that supposed to balance things out, prevent bias, ensure, common sense justice prevailed?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? And that was probably part of the idea. But here's the critical point. The whole system was fundamentally shaped by the agonistic values of the citizens themselves, the litigants fighting it out, and the jurors watching.
What do you mean by agonistic values in this context?
They weren't trained legal professionals looking for precedent or fine legal points. They were ordinary citizens. They reacted to things like character. Did they trust this speaker? Rhetorical skill. Was he persuasive? Appealing?
So performance mattered a lot.
Hugely. And they reacted to the perceived moral standing of the person talking. Juries were huge, yes, but also non-professional, untrained. This made them incredibly susceptible to emotional appeals, to character assassination, to arguments appealing to their own biases, maybe against the rich or against political opponents.
So the outcome wasn't necessarily driven by legal principle, but by who put on the better show, who swayed the crowd.
Often, yes. It was driven by public performance, reputation, and maybe prejudice, rather than what we'd call the principled imperatives of an autonomous legal order. The law itself wasn't really in charge.
And nothing really screams personal daddle more than this concept of ekthra, formal, acknowledged enmity that played a real role in court.
A central role. It's fascinating. For a citizen to bring a serious case, especially a public prosecution, they were often explicitly required to state their relationship with the opponent, specifically whether a state of extra or enmity existed.
You had to declare you were enemies.
You had to explain your motives to the jury. And if your motive was clearly rooted in a known feud, an existing ecthra, the jury understood that. They often accepted it as a perfectly legitimate reason for bringing the lawsuit in the first place.
That feels so backward to us now. We think personal animosity taints the process, suggests bias. But in Athens, it was almost a requirement, a justification.
In many cases, yes. It answered the implicit question, why are you, a private citizen, spending your time and effort on this prosecution, especially for serious public charges?
So the court wasn't just solving a legal problem, it was sort of formally acknowledging the feud itself, giving it a legal stage to play out on.
That's a key function it served, absolutely. If you didn't have ecthra, if you had no personal stake, the jury might wonder why you were meddling. The common explanation, especially in things like homicide cases or major public indictments, was that the prosecutor felt a duty arising from this enmity. Maybe because of a family injury, like his brother being killed, or a long-standing political rivalry.
And you see this all the time in the speeches that survive, right? Prosecutors don't hide it, they lean into it.
Exactly, they leverage it.
Right.
In homicide cases, they regularly acknowledge the ecthra between themselves and their defendant. They presented this enmity as the very grounds, the reason for the prosecution.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The sources mention the orator Lysias. He's prosecuting someone connected to his brother's death during the reign of the 30 tyrants. He explicitly points to the oikaiva ekra, the personal, the household enmity that resulted from that death. That's the engine driving his legal action.
So it wasn't just this man broke the law, it was more like,
It was, this man is my sworn enemy because of this terrible wrong he did to my family, and I am now using the state's machinery, the court, to pursue my rightful vengeance. The legal case and the personal vendetta were tangled together. Indistinguishable, really.
okay, if you basically build personal vengeance into the justice system, it makes sense that the number of lawsuits would just explode. Constant conflict. And the sources suggest this wasn't just a minor annoyance. This level of hyper-litigiousness, all these court battles, people saw it as genuinely destabilizing for the whole city.
It was seen as a major problem, a drain on society. And this is where someone like Plato comes in. He observed this constant legal warfare and saw it as a deep political sickness.
Plato worried about lawsuits.
He did. He stated quite clearly in his work, The Laws, that a city, a polis, simply cannot achieve conquered genuine harmony, stability, peace when lawsuits are running rampant everywhere.
Why? Why was that fear so intense? How could private squabbles in court threaten the whole political order?
Because in a direct democracy like Athens, the courts and politics weren't separate spheres. They were completely intertwined. Every big public trial was a political event. Rampant lawsuits meant citizens were constantly dividing into factions, supporting this litigant against that one. It meant people's wealth, their reputation, their standing in the community were perpetually under threat.
That sounds exhausting
Yeah.
and terrifying.
It created an environment of constant suspicion, fear, political maneuvering. Imagine knowing that any dispute, any public disagreement could escalate into a huge public trial where you might face crippling fines, maybe lose your citizenship rights, maybe even face exile or death if you lost.
Yeah, that constant pressure, that constant threat, it would make it impossible to build the trust you need for real civic harmony, for Plato's conquered.
Exactly. The agonistic arena of the courts, fueled by ecthra, wasn't just resolving disputes, it was actively breeding political instability. #tag2. Weaponizing the legal system for personal gain.
So this built-in instability, this encouragement of conflict, it basically created the perfect environment for exploitation.
Absolutely right for it.
And now we're moving from that general atmosphere of conflict to the specifics. How did these opportunistic citizens, these sycophants we mentioned, actively weaponize the law just for their own personal, usually financial gain?
And this weaponization went straight for the jugular, the most sensitive areas of Athenian life. Inheritance, family disputes, money.
Makes sense. That's where the stakes are high.
Precisely. In the family sphere, particularly inheritance cases, especially if there wasn't a clear adult male heir, the legal process often achieved the exact opposite of what you'd hope.
Meaning it didn't settle things.
It worked far more effectively to prolong the family conflict than to actually reach a quote-unquote just or final decision.
How come?
Well, think about it. These cases often involved incredibly complex histories, allegations going back decades about who was related to whom, what a long-dead relative really intended in their will, hidden assets. The courtroom had no professional judges, no investigators like we have. It was just this massive jury of ordinary citizens.
So they were structurally incapable of digging out the real truth in these complicated messes.
Pretty much. And the litigants, especially the predatory ones, the sycophants, they knew this. They understood the court's limitations.
And they exploited that weakness.
Ruthlessly. They'd constantly introduce new claims, drag in obscure witnesses, produce questionable documents. They essentially ensured the whole inheritance process wasn't about finding the truth, but became framed as a contest open to all in which no result was final.
Wow. So winning one case didn't mean anything.
It just meant you had a brief pause before the next lawsuit started. Yesterday's victory was just today's launching pad for the next attack.
That sounds absolutely nightmarish, financially crippling, emotionally draining, and perfectly designed to create targets for these legal predators, the sycophants.
Exactly.
And there's one case from the sources that just perfectly illustrates this kind of sustained, malicious legal harassment, right? The story of the orator Demosthenes and his guardians.
Oh, the Demosthenes case is the absolute archetype. It shows every single facet of this legal exploitation and obstruction. Let's really dig into it.
Okay, so young Demosthenes inherits a fortune, but his guardians mismanage or embezzle it.
That was his claim. And he eventually sued one of them, his cousin Aphobus, and he won. The court ordered Aphobus to pay back 10 talents, a huge, huge sum of money.
Victory. Justice served.
Not even close. The legal win achieved precisely zero practical justice for Demosthenes. In fact, it just made things worse. It escalated the conflict into this bitter, drawn-out war of attrition.
So Aphobus didn't just accept the verdict and pay up?
Are you kidding? He launched into this campaign of obstruction fueled by what seems like pure, unadulterated malice. He was determined that Demosthenes would never see a single drachma of that money.
How did he obstruct? Just legal appeals?
Oh, it went way beyond legal appeal. The sources give us these incredible, almost unbelievable details. First, the legal maneuvering. Aphobus immediately started transferring his property lands, houses to his brother and his brother-in-law, Wenator, trying to make himself judgment-proof.
Hiding the assets. Classic.
But then it got personal, vindictive, sabotage.
How so?
The text says Aphobus, before potentially losing possession of a house Demosthenes was claiming, removed both furnishings and slaves from his house, obstructed the cistern, and tore off the doors, did everything that set fire to the house itself, and then emigrated to Megara, where he lived as an alien.
Wait. He tore off the doors and blocked the cistern, the water supply.
Yes. Think about the sheer spite involved. Tearing off the doors isn't about legally protecting assets, blocking the water supply. These are acts of gratuitous vandalism, designed not just to avoid the debt, but to make the property unusable, to maximize Demosthenes' pain and cost if he ever did get possession.
That's incredible. It's like petty revenge elevated to an art form disguised as legal resistance. This wasn't just a court case anymore.
Not at all. It spilled out of the courts. Aphobus basically forced Demosthenes to realize that a legal judgment on its own was worthless against a wealthy, determined, and spiteful opponent. You needed more leverage.
Public pressure.
Exactly. Demosthenes had to escalate. He took the fight public. Right into the agora, the marketplace, the heart of the city. He turned this private financial dispute into a massive public spectacle. He needed to shame his opponents, generate public outrage against Aphobus and his relative orator.
And this is where that really dark tactic comes in, using the testimony of slaves.
Yes. This is the ultimate escalation. In the agora, in front of everyone, Demosthenes issues this public challenge to Wenator. He demands that Wenator agree to have a particular literate slave tortured to extract testimony.
Why that slave? And why torture?
This slave had apparently handled accounts or witnessed transactions crucial to proving where Aphobus' money had gone. And in Athenian law, critically, slave testimony was only considered valid if it was obtained under torture. It was believed they wouldn't tell the truth otherwise.
So Demosthenes making that demand in public, it put Wenator in an impossible bind.
Completely. If Wenator agrees to the torture, it's brutal, it's scandalous. Maybe the slave reveals damning evidence. If he refuses the torture challenge,
He looks instantly guilty, like he's hiding something.
Precisely. Demosthenes used the public square, the threat of torture, the manipulation of reputation, because the formal legal system itself was insufficient. The court was just one stage. The real battle was for public opinion and leverage.
It shows how ingrained this litigiousness was. Winning wasn't enough. You had to keep fighting, using these extreme public tactics, especially if your opponent had money and was willing to obstruct indefinitely. The law alone couldn't deliver.
And this weaponization wasn't just for money or inheritance, it bled directly into high-stakes politics. Sometimes the actual legal charge seemed almost irrelevant compared to the personal damage the trial was designed to inflict.
Like using a trial as a political weapon.
Absolutely. We see this crystal clear in the famous showdowns between Demosthenes and his great political rival Aeschines. Demosthenes flat out accused Aeschines of bringing a prosecution against him, not because he'd actually committed a serious crime,
So for other reasons.
but merely using the trial as an opportunity for him to express hostile rancor, insult, abuse, defamation, and so on all at once. Just a public platform to tear Demosthenes down.
So the trial itself becomes the punishment, regardless of the verdict. Character assassination theater.
Exactly. And Demosthenes had this brilliant counterattack on Aeschines' motives. He basically said, look, if my supposed crimes were so terrible, if I'd really broken the law that badly years ago when he claims,
Yeah.
why didn't Aeschines act then? He should have impeached me, Demosthenes, or he should have indicted me if he found me making illegal proposals right when it happened.
The timing gives him away.
Right. Aeschines waited. He held on to this potential charge until the moment it would cause the maximum political damage, the maximum personal embarrassment. Demosthenes argued this delay proved the real motive wasn't justice, it was pure malicious spite, using a high-profile trial years later as the ultimate political revenge.
So the lesson here is that the democratic legal machine, it wasn't just a tool for accountability, it was also this heavy strategic bludgeon.
Available to anyone willing to invest the time, the rhetorical effort, and maybe the malice to swing it for their own personal or political destruction. Tag 3. Legal mechanisms exploited for extortion and intimidation.
Okay, so let's get to the real nitty-gritty of the extortion racket. How did these sycophants actually make a living from this? They needed specific legal tools, right? Things that were powerful, cheap to initiate, and carried penalties so scary that the target would rather just pay up.
Precisely. And the absolute engine of this exploitation was a particular type of legal action. The public prosecution or graphy.
Okay, unpack the graphy for us. Why was this the sycophant's weapon of choice? It wasn't just about winning the argument.
No, it was about the money. This is crucial. Unlike a private lawsuit,
Yeah.
where maybe you just recover damages, the graphy often carried a massive financial incentive for the prosecutor.
A reward.
A huge one. If you, as a private citizen, successfully brought a graphy against someone and they were convicted and fined or their property confiscated, you, the prosecutor, often received a substantial cut, sometimes as much as 50% of the penalty.
50%. Okay, now I see it.
Right. That structure creates an immediate, powerful financial motive. Any wealthy citizen automatically becomes a potential target. Not because they necessarily did anything wrong, but because their wealth represents a potential jackpot for any ambitious or perhaps unscrupulous citizen willing to gamble on a prosecution.
It literally creates a class of legal bounty hunters fueled by the state's own rules.
That's a perfect description. Legal bounty hunters operating within the democratic system.
And what was the most terrifying charge that these sycophants could threaten someone with using a graphy?
Without a doubt, the charge of hubris.
Hubris. We hear that word a lot. But it wasn't just arrogance, was it?
No, much more serious in the legal context. It's tricky to translate perfectly. It meant something like outrageous behavior, excessive wrongdoing, violent insolence, actions that weren't just a private matter between two people, but were seen as an offense against the entire community, an attack on the democratic order itself.
And because it was an offense against the community?
It was a perfect candidate for a graphy, which meant if the sycophant prosecutor won the hubris case.
They stood to gain half the defendant's potentially enormous fine or confiscated property.
Exactly. The financial incentive was massive.
And for the person accused of hubris, what were they facing if found guilty? We're not just talking fines anymore, are we?
Oh, the penalties were potentially catastrophic. Because it was seen as undermining the community, the punishment could be far worse than just money. Astronomical fines, yes, but also etimia, the complete loss of citizenship rights. Can you imagine being stripped of your right to speak in the assembly, to serve on juries, essentially becoming a non-person?
Devastating in a city like Athens.
And in the most extreme cases, a hubris conviction could even lead to execution.
Execution. Just for hubris.
It was possible, depending on the perceived severity. So, given these potentially life-destroying consequences, you can see why the mere threat of a graphy for hubris was often enough.
Enough to make a wealthy person just pay the sycophant off. pay a huge sum in hush money just to make the threat go away.
Absolutely. Why risk losing everything, fortune, citizenship, maybe even your life in a public trial, decided by a volatile citizen jury, when you can just pay the blackmailer?
And the definition of hubris, it seems like it could be stretched quite a bit. It wasn't tightly defined.
Deliberately so, it seems. It was quite flexible, which made it even more dangerous. Almost any public act of perceived arrogance or disrespect, especially towards the symbols of democracy, could potentially be framed as hubris.
Like what, for instance?
Well, look at Demosthenes again in his speeches against his enemy Midias. He argued that even a fairly minor physical assault, maybe a shove or a slap committed against public officials while they were performing their duties, could be magnified, portrayed, and prosecuted as hubris. So imagine a rich guy losing his temper and pushing a minor magistrate in the agora. Suddenly, a sycophant sees an opportunity.
And that rich guy could face losing half his fortune and his citizenship.
Potentially, yes. If the sycophant prosecutor was rhetorically skillful enough to convince the jury that this wasn't just assault, but an arrogant attack on the dignity of the democracy itself, the sheer potential scale of the penalty made hubris the ultimate weapon of intimidation for these legal predators.
And we have to circle back to that other dark tool we saw Demosthenes use, but think about it more generally. Weaponizing slavery, that demand for torture in public.
Yes, that wasn't unique to Demosthenes' case. It reflects a grim reality of the Athenian legal system and how desperate the search for reliable evidence could be.
Because slave testimony was only admissible under torture.
Correct. That was the legal principle.
Yeah.
So publicly demanding your opponent submit their slave to torture wasn't just about finding facts. It was a powerful, dark, tactical move. It was about public perception, shifting the burden of proof, putting your opponent on the spot.
How would that work in a more typical case, say a financial dispute?
Imagine a complex contract case or an inheritance battle where household accounts or private conversations are key. One litigant could stand up and issue the challenge. My opponent claims innocence. Fine. Let them prove it. Submit your household slave, the one who manages the books, to the legally mandated torture. Then we'll see the truth.
And if the opponent refused?
Instant suspicion falls on them. The jury, the public, they'd immediately think, they're refusing because they know the slave will reveal their guilt under torture. It made them look like they were hiding crucial evidence.
So it was an aggressive way to pressure your opponent, especially a wealthy one.
Exactly. Wealthy household had more slaves, therefore more potential witnesses who could be subjected to this demand. It was a way to apply maximum moral and public pressure, exploiting the legal rules around slave testimony to gain an advantage when hard evidence was otherwise lacking.
Okay, so you have these incredibly potent legal vulnerabilities, the catastrophic stakes of a hubris charge, the huge financial incentive driving the graphy, the ability to weaponize slave testimony, all feeding into this system.
And it was all underpinned, really, by deep simmering societal anxiety about wealth and inequality in Athens.
The rich were just constant targets.
They were perpetual targets, yes. The system, perhaps unintentionally, almost encouraged poorer or just ambitious citizens to use the law against their wealthier neighbors. It became a sort of backdoor wealth redistribution mechanism through fines, confiscations, and straight-up legal blackmail by sycophants.
And the source material suggests this wasn't just an Athenian problem, right? This pattern of the powerful or the opportunistic using legal systems for extortion. It happened elsewhere.
Yes, the sources make useful comparisons, for instance, to the Roman Republic, thinking about corrupt provincial governors. Figures like Verres, famously prosecuted by Cicero.
How does that compare?
Well, in the Roman provinces, powerful governors and their staff could often exercise almost arbitrary power to enrich themselves. Systematic extortion, demanding gifts or imposing bogus fines, knowing the locals had very little effective recourse against a powerful Roman official back in Rome.
So, different system, but similar outcome. Legal or quasi-legal power used for personal profit by exploiting imbalances.
Exactly. It shows that whether you have the radical democracy of Athens, where anyone can prosecute, or the oligarchic structures of Rome, where elites control the levers, if you have significant wealth disparities and a legal system that can be manipulated, either by mass access or elite control, this pattern of legal exploitation and extortion tends to emerge.
So the Athenian anxiety about sycophants targeting the rich wasn't just paranoia, it was rooted in a systemic problem common in ancient societies with wealth friction.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
And exacerbated in Athens by a democratic system that basically handed every citizen the potential tools to become a freelance prosecutor, a potential sycophant.
And we know these social tensions were real, right? It wasn't a harmonious society underneath.
Not at all. We see playwrights like Euripides questioning the very institution of slavery. There were radical social theories floating around. This philosophical ferment shows that the wealth gaps, the power imbalances that the sycophants exploited, were already major points of tension in society.
So when the state provides a legal mechanism, like the graphi for hubris, that offers a direct financial reward for exploiting that existing social friction.
Exploitation becomes almost inevitable. The sycophants were, in a way, a natural product of the system itself.
So Athens, in this noble democratic project to empower every citizen to pursue justice, they inadvertently created the perfect ecosystem for these legal opportunists to thrive.
It seems that way. They leveraged the system's accessibility, the financial incentives, the sheer severity of charges like hubris, and turned democratic justice into a tool for systematic, often organized, harassment and extortion. #outro.
So where does this leave us? When we pull these threads together, the focus on enmity, the endless contests, the weaponized procedures, the sycophants, what's the big takeaway?
I think the story of Athens courts, especially the darker side we've explored, serves as a really potent cautionary tale. It's about the potential dangers of maximizing citizen access to the legal system without simultaneously building strong, autonomous, objective legal institutions.
Meaning just giving everyone the power to sue isn't enough.
It might even be counterproductive if you don't have mechanisms to ensure fairness, professionalism, and a focus on truth over just winning. Athens created the sycophants, this class of legal predators, precisely because its system lacked those safeguards.
They perfected the art of weaponized litigation.
They really did, by making personal enmity, ethra, a valid starting point for prosecution, and by allowing every kind of dispute, family feuds, political fights, inheritance squabbles, to become these drawn-out, public, financially devastating contests. The law itself became the weapon.
The most effective tool for harassment and extortion available.
Yeah. We saw it so clearly in that Demosthenes case. He wins in court, but it means nothing. He's immediately met with this spiteful obstruction, forcing him into that desperate public spectacle in the agora. The system wasn't designed to resolve conflict cleanly.
It just adjourned it, maybe, until the next sycophant saw an opening for another lawsuit.
That feels about right. Ultimately, the abuses highlight this fundamental tension. Maximizing access to justice, which sounds great in principle, can also inadvertently maximize the opportunities for legal predation, especially when the surrounding legal culture values winning the contest, performance, reputation, and maybe getting that big payout from the graphi more than it values finding objective truth.
Which leaves us with a pretty stark final thought, doesn't it?
I think so.
The line separating the noble citizen prosecutor, the ideal Democrat standing up against injustice, from the malicious legal manipulator, the sycophant out for revenge or profit. That line was alarmingly thin in ancient Athens.
Disturbingly thin. And where did the judgment lie?
Not with professional judges weighing evidence objectively, but with this massive, untrained, easily swayed citizen jury, their subjective feelings, their biases, their reaction to the performance they just saw.
Exactly. It shows how easily high democratic ideals, like equal access to justice, can be twisted and perverted by basic human self-interest, greed, and malice when the system itself allows or even encourages it. A sobering lesson from the ancient world for any legal system, really.